Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to be looking at traps in the Caro-Kann, which is my favorite opening, which you probably know. Now, most of these traps I've either fallen for or had other people fall for, so they are not impractical. They could well happen in your own games over the board and especially online. They're also not easy, not all of them at least, so they're going to be featuring players like Kasparov and Korchnoi and other strong players, so they could happen in regular tournament games, even among Grandmasters. I'm going to start with a trap in the Breyer variation. This trap I've actually had happen 5 times. I've never been on the receiving end, and this trap is the reason I play g6 in the Breyer. Nobody has ever fallen for it in a classical game, but online, as I said, 5 times. Okay, so white plays d3, we go d5, knight to d2, this is all normal, and now g6. g6 is a normal way to respond to the King's Indian attack setup, which white is basically going for. So let me show you the starting position for the trap. So bishop g7, bishop g2, you go e5, and your idea is to go knight e7 and castle. Okay, and in this position, white could be threatening to take on e5 after rook e1, so black's most common move is pawn to d4. Now here, players with white who are experienced are going to go for a long strategic battle, and they're going to be playing moves like a4 or b4 or c3, breaking your center straight away. However, those less experienced, like in the game where this trap became famous, Mr. Littlewood, who faced Korchnoi with the black pieces, are going to play knight to c4. And this is where our trap starts. So knight c4 puts pressure on e5. Now, defending the pawn is basically impossible unless you play f6, which of course is not a good move. If you play a move like queen c7, you could defend the pawn, but maybe takes, maybe bishop f4. The trap begins with pawn to b5. And you wouldn't believe how many people, after they've played knight c4, simply take on e5, which loses a piece. So this sets up a trap. First seen in 2004 in the game Littlewood Korchnoi. Korchnoi was still rated over 2600, so of course he's not going to miss this. I don't know whether he knew about the trap, but his opponent took. And now we simply play pawn to f6, and that's it. The knight has no squares. The bishop covers g4, c6 is defended, everything is defended, you lose a piece. In that game, Korchnoi's opponent played pawn to c3, which, I mean, just loses a piece. Doesn't really matter what white plays. After f6, the game should be over. The best move should be to take on g6. I've had this happen in all of the 5 games where I had the black pieces here. I tried taking with the knight and with the pawn. After some analysis, I concluded that taking with the knight is more precise. Firstly, because you restrict the knight on f3, so you don't want the knight coming to f5, and you definitely don't want to give up your bishop. On c8, it still keeps defense of the d4 pawn, and you can later on look forward to knight e5, trying to trade this one off. So that's the first trap. So in this position after rook e1, which is the main line, and this has happened over 200 times, you go d4, which is the best move. And if they go knight c4 and you go b5, they really should go back. And after they go back, you can continue your normal expansion with c5 later on after you've developed your pieces. Usually, and I've never had this happen, but if it did happen in my game, I would continue with something like h6 and bishop e6 to prevent knight g5, and then knight bd7 and c5. Okay, the next trap I want to show you is one of my favorites again, and this is a trap I have fallen for myself. In 2019, when I was playing in Novi Sad, in the Novi Sad Open, I was facing a Mongolian player rated about 2100, and I had no experience in the position I'm going to show you. So this actually happened to me in a tournament game. So it's I mean, I'm rated 2000 FIDE. I think I was 1800 back then. So most weak players could still fall for this. It's a theoretical trap. So people who know what they're doing are not going to fall for it. But still, you should know it if you play the Caro-Kann or if you play pawn to e4. Okay, so the Caro-Kann, and in this trap we are looking at knight c3, d4, knight e4, and knight d7, the Karpov. I had the black pieces in this position. Knight g5, which is one of the most common moves in conjunction with either bishop c4 or bishop d3. Knight gf6, bishop c4, this is all mainline stuff. Queen e2, now you have to play knight to b6, and white has to play bishop to d3. And this is our starting position. Now, since 2019, I've had this position on the board several times, and every time, of course, I've played the correct move and I've learned the variation. When I had it first time, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just starting to play the Karpov. So the correct move is pawn h6, and the knight simply drops back to f3, and you continue c5, breaking white's center. The mistake, the losing blunder I played in that game is queen takes d4. Now, of course, I was aware of knight to f3, and it's not as if I'd missed that. I'd just miscalculated a very important variation. So my opponent in that game played knight to f3, and of course if I go back with queen d5, and that's another line of play, which I didn't do, white is still much better after knight e5, and the f7 pawn is going to cave in. The best black has is to take on g2, and after rook f1 to play something like bishop c5, where you could take on f7, but it's actually more precise to play bishop to d2. And if bishop d4 is played, you take on f7. If castles is played, saving the pawn, now you simply go knight g to f3, and your next move is going to be rook g1, and white should be winning this position. But I didn't want to go for that because I saw that. So I played the move which I thought keeps my pawn, and everything is fine. I played bishop b4 check. Unfortunately, this loses by force to c3. And I was thinking, okay, queen d4, knight f3, bishop b4 check, c3, bishop c3. So I just win. That this is game over. And of course, if white takes, black does win, but white played king f1 and the game was over. And that's it. You just lose a piece. I played queen b4, bc, queen c, and bishop b2, and black resigned. Well, I don't think if I resigned here, maybe I played on a bit more, but the game is definitely losing. So in this position, which is a highly theoretical position with 1,000 master games, you need to play h6. If you take the pawn on d4, if you have the white pieces and they take the pawn on d4, that's it. You are winning the game. Play knight f3 and game over. Okay, the next trap I want to show you is also in the Karpov variation, and this is a trap I've prepared for Grandmaster Zelčić when we played in the first Croatian league last year. So he is the best Croatian Caro-Kann player. He's rated between 25 and 2600, I'm not sure now. So this is a trap that I think very high rated players could fall for. Unfortunately, he deviated 2 moves before we got to that, or 1 move before we got to that. So I didn't get to play it, and I'm going to show it to you now. So d4, d5. Again, we have the Karpov, knight c3, d4, knight e4, knight d7. No, he actually didn't deviate 2 moves before. He actually didn't go for the variation at all. He played knight f3 here. Excuse me. I was expecting him to go for the main line. Okay, so bishop d3, knight gf6. This is another variation of the Karpov, and the most promising one for white, I should mention. Knight g5, again, this is all standard. If you don't know this, you can watch my video on the Karpov. Knight 1 to f3, bishop d6, all very standard. We are going to be having a look at this position in the next trap as well, so bear that in mind. Bishop d6, the theoretical move, queen e2, and now pawn to h6. Now, in this position, white does have the option to take on e6, but that sacrifice doesn't work. But that's a topic for another day. White plays knight e4, black exchanges, queen takes, and knight f6. And now in this position, the most common move is queen e2, and that should be the best move. But the second most popular is queen h4. And this is the reason why this variation got named the Karpov, why knight d7 got named the Karpov. And the idea Karpov had was king to e7. And this is his most iconic move. And the variation goes knight e5, bishop e5, d5, queen a5 check, takes on e5, and black should be a pawn up for, well, white should have compensation, but it's a pawn. Since then, since the 90s, a move was discovered that's actually the best engine move. It's also extremely counterintuitive, so if you don't know it, there's very little chance you're going to find it. I've spent a long time analyzing this position after the next move I'm going to show you, and it sets up a very, very vicious trap, and the move is rook to g8. Now, this sets up a trap and white has to be careful. If white plays a normal move, it's game over. If white plays, for example, castles, let's have a look at one bad move. There are probably 11 or 12 bad options, but if castles, the idea behind rook to g8 is simply to play g5. Now, where can the queen go? Everything is covered. The queen only has h3, and you simply continue g4, you win a piece. It's game over. So after rook to g8, the threat is actually to win the knight by force. So if something like bishop e3, trying to castle queenside because, well, you have a rook on g8, again, g5, queen h3, g4, game over. If white tries pawn to h3, trying to prevent g4, then g5, queen takes h6 and bishop f8, and again, it's game over. Covered, 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 covered. Game over. h3 doesn't work. The only move and the theoretical move, which if white doesn't know it, and if he isn't like 22, 2300 or above, I think he's going to fall for the trap or spend a lot of time. And the move is knight to d2. Now this move, covering your last undeveloped piece with one of your two only developed pieces is strange. And even though knight d2 doesn't lose a piece, rook g8 is not a bad move. It's the best engine move and black is completely equal. You still continue g5. And after black takes on h6, which is the only option basically, you go bishop f8. The queen retreats to h3 and now you take on d4. And the game goes on from here. And it's a complicated struggle. And this is the position I was analyzing for Grandmaster Zelčić. I was actually preparing this exact position for more than a day. And he deviated. Okay, so rook g8 in the Karpov sets up a trap of winning the knight. Okay, the next trap is very interesting and also historically very significant. This is from the Deep Blue Kasparov match, or Kasparov Deep Blue match in '98. And we are going to be having a look at this same position. It's just from the white side. Well, we can actually flip the board. So if you remember when we were looking at this 2 minutes ago, bishop d6 was our move and white continued queen e2 and we went h6 and all the exchanges happened. Now, there's a story behind this move Kasparov played. Kasparov played with the black pieces here. And he played a well-known, even at that time, blunder that allows white to win the game with a very powerful sacrifice. Now, later on, it was said, and that may be true, that he played it on purpose because he thought Deep Blue wasn't going to go for that. He thought that Deep Blue was going to retreat. And Kasparov played the move pawn to h6, and this is incredibly bad. It's said that he thought Deep Blue would play knight to e4. I mean, it's very hard to believe that. Yeah. Okay, so if you want, you can pause the video here. I need to plug in my laptop. Pause the video here and figure out how white can win. It's white to play and win. Okay, in this position, there's a very powerful sacrifice, which if you play the Caro-Kann, you need to be aware of because it works in many, many different positions, and that's knight takes e6. Now, Kasparov didn't take the knight. taking the knight loses, and I think he knew it. If he didn't know it, then I would bet he knew it. He played queen to e7. And the game simply continued. Castles, f6 now, bishop to g6, and king to d8, and so on. And he ended up losing the game. If you take the knight, f6, then bishop g6 check. Whoa, excuse me, bishop g6 check. The king is forced to e7, and now you can simply continue bishop f4, and I mean, queen a5 check is a possibility, and white should be much better. This is a well-known sacrifice. Sometimes in some positions the engine says it's equal, but it's not equal. Black should lose this almost every time. So again, in this position, which is theoretical, don't make the same mistake Kasparov did. Play bishop d6. I should mention, when I started playing the Karpov, I did fall for this twice, actually. Twice, not once, twice. And I played h6 twice in blitz games online, not in tournament games, but still. And I actually lost to knight e6 in 3 different positions, which are not theoretical, but for the same reason. h6 basically gives up the g6 square, so knight e6 works. Okay, the next trap I want to show you is also very thematic. This I didn't fall for myself. I actually had people fall for it. So after e4, c6, we are looking at this from the white perspective, d4, d5, knight c3. Again, we have the Karpov. And I had the white pieces here in 2 blitz games. I played knight g5. And from here, you should already be familiar with the normal moves, either knight gf6 or knight df6. Knight gf6 is the most popular, going into the lines we just saw where white could play bishop c4 or bishop to d3. If black tries chasing away the knight immediately, black loses. Pawn h6. Again, you can pause the video and figure out the way to punish this. It's the same pattern. It's always the same pattern. The idea is knight e6. And this knight simply cannot be taken. If the knight is taken, it's mate in 2. You have queen h5 and mate. After g6, queen g6 mate. So after knight e6, the queen has to move. People usually play queen b6. And now you can simply take on f8. And after king f8, you have the bishop pair, and black's king is misplaced. And it should be winning. Of course, you can mess up, but it should be winning, especially in a tournament game. So knight g5 is a neat move, which is the mainline move, similar to rook g8, or the engine best move, similar to rook g8. Where, I mean, h6 could happen. It happened in a lot of games online. Okay, now this position I'm about to show you is the most thematic trap in the Caro-Kann, and this you all know about, but I had to mention it. It could actually happen from 2 different openings. It could happen from the Karpov or from the 2 knights. Most people know it from the Karpov with d4, d5, knight c3 takes. Knight d7, queen e2, and now a very well-known mistake is knight g2 f6, where you fall for knight d6 mate. And this is probably the most famous trap in the Caro-Kann. Now, a more interesting way to enter this, which actually happened in a game Paul Keres played. Paul Keres had the white pieces. His opponent, his name is Arlamovsky, so he's definitely not famous. I have no idea what his rating was. He fell for it. So we are going into this from the 2 knights, so d5, knight f3, and now after d4, knight e4, his opponent played knight f6. Keres played queen e2, and his opponent played knight bd7. And it's the same thing, it's just knight d6 mate on move 6. And I should confess that in this position, about 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, I was playing a Croatian FIDE master named Lovro Čupić in a friendly blitz game in our club. And I played knight gf6. And I vividly remember him saying, "I don't believe you fell for that." And he played knight d6 mate. So I learned from bitter experience that this is checkmate. So I actually fell for this 4 years ago. Luckily for me, it wasn't a tournament game. Okay, the next trap is extremely interesting. This trap was played 700 times on lichess, 700 times. So there's an extremely high chance that someone will fall for it. We are looking at it from e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, the classical, d4, knight e4, and now trying to go either for the Bronstein-Larsen or the Korchnoi. Now if they take, it's theory and all that, but some people play knight g3. Now your trap starts with the move h5, and even if they don't fall for the trap, even if they don't follow up the way you want them to, this is a good move. You play pawn to h5. And pawn to h5 simply threatens to dislodge the knight. The knight would have to go back to e2. There are no other sensible squares. And this trap was actually played in Schuster-Karls in 1914, so it happened in a tournament game. Now, the move played 700 times on lichess and a few times in regular games is bishop g5. And this move, if white isn't an experienced player, makes a lot of sense. It prevents h4. Black has no h-pawn anymore, so he cannot play pawn to h6. But you simply continue h4, or well, prevents h4. It doesn't prevent h4, but it puts the bishop on a good square, and maybe prepares after h4 bishop f6 and then knight e4, so gives the knight a square. You still continue h4, and now this is very pleasant. I've been wanting to play this with black for such a long time. I never got to play it. This one I never got to play. So they take on f6, which is the reason behind bishop g5. You take on g3, okay? And they play bishop e5, which is the idea. So defending the pawn, saving the bishop, white should be a pawn ahead, and the game should be over. And in this position, people on lichess take on f2 with check. This is a bad move. You have a forced win here. It's a forced win that either wins a rook or wins a queen. And the way to play this is rook takes h2. So this is a forcing move. You're threatening to take the rook. There is no way to save the rook except for taking. And after rook takes h2, you don't take back, because white could take back. You play queen a5 check. The only move is either queen d2 or c3. It doesn't matter which move white plays. After c3, you take the bishop with check. This is forced, basically. And now you take the rook, and you're going to get a queen. And if you look at the material, you are going to be completely winning a piece up, and it's game over. So once again, if against knight f6 they play knight g3, you continue h5. Now there are normal moves here. h4 is the best move. Bishop c4 is a good move. h3 is also playable but doesn't make much sense. h4 should be played basically. But if they play bishop g5, then h4, bishop f6, hg3. Now there is no other logical move except for bishop e5, so bishop e5. And now remember not to take on f2 like most people on lichess. Play queen a5 check. Take the bishop with check. Whoa, excuse me. Not queen a5 check first, rook h2 first. And after rook h2, queen a5 check. c3, take the bishop with check, and you make a queen. This is lovely. I cannot wait to get this on the board. I'm sure I will at some point. Okay, the next trap is a well-known idea from the fantasy variation, which is very scary for black, the fantasy in itself. So the mainline way to punish the fantasy is to take on e4 and to play e5. Now white should continue knight f3. This is mainline stuff. So after e d4, bishop to c4. And in this position, the correct move, which is very hard to play if you don't know it, is knight f6. Because it seems like there could be knight g5, there could be knight e5. What's going on? Seems very scary. So knight f6 is theory. There have been 20, 30 games with knight f6. But most people are going to make the mistake I'm about to show you, and that's bishop to b4 check. I played this with both colors a couple of years ago in online games. I don't remember exactly when, but I lost to this once with black, and then I won with it with white afterwards. So after bishop b4 check, if white moves the king or plays bishop to d2, then knight f6 is of course a good move, and you get to castle. So people with white are going to play c3, okay, c3. And now as black, you don't have any other option but to take, of course, dc3. And this is the trap. If they take the pawn, it's game over. Again, you can pause the video, but it's quite simple. Bishop takes f7 check. The queen is undefended. And you may think, well, I'm going to get another queen with check after cb and the king moves and ba1. However, well, there are a couple of options. He can keep defending the queen or take the bishop. Let's look at king e7 first. After king e7, you have queen b3. And if, for example, I don't know, this is a huge threat, and this. So, for example, knight f6, you just go bc3. So with king e7, this is very promising. Saves the bishop, and now you can go e5, and this position is about +10, so should be completely winning. Of course, you can still get into trouble because the king is open, but just remember queen b3 if they play king e7 with bishop g5 and e5. But after bishop f7, most people are just going to take because they think I'm going to get a queen of my own. However, this runs into checkmate. And this I learned, played with black, lost to it, and then won with it. So you take the queen, they take a queen with check, basically, king d1, and ba1 equals queen. They have to do it, otherwise there's a queen down. But now there's a forced mate in 5 moves. This is going to be a bit hard if you don't know it. I fell for it as black, I didn't see it, so it's not an easy checkmate, but it's pretty forcing. It's all with checks, so you should be able to figure it out. Pause the video and figure out the mate in 5. Okay, white to play and win. Knight g5 check, king g6, that's it, that's the only option, so that's easy. Queen e8 check, very forcing, again, king h6, and now you simply go knight e6 check. You discover the bishop, and for example, I don't know, I think bishop d2 is the way to prevent mate in 3. So for example, like this, takes, and now g5 and bishop g5, and that should be it. So in the fantasy, in this main line, bishop c4 is a very scary move. Most people are going to play knight f6 if they know it. If they don't know it, bishop b4 is very tempting. I didn't know it, I thought it had to be the best move. And after c3, what can you do if you don't take now? dc3 and game over. Bishop f7. Boom. Okay, the next trap is very high level. This is actually the hardest trap I want to show you today. And the move we are going to be discussing is in the 2 knights when the exchange happens. Knight takes, and the move bishop f5. Now, bishop f5 is not losing in itself, but it's very close to losing. And if they play bishop f5, their follow-up is most likely going to be falling for the trap. Now, this was played by Vasily Ivanchuk, Erwin Lamy, Stelvegen, Gunina, Kalifman. I've had a look at their games with black, and I tried to figure out how they could fall for this, but they did. Okay, so bishop f5. And you continue with knight g3, which is a pretty forcing move. Now, the way to stay in the game for black, which most people probably find counterintuitive, is bishop to g4. And white should simply be slightly better here with the lead in development. You can continue bishop e2, or bishop c4, or d4. White should have a pleasant game. The bishop is outside of the pawn chain, and you could choose to win the bishop straight away if you want to, or play h3 because you want to give your king some luft in the future, but white should be better. But the move most people are going to play is bishop to g6. Okay, and now we are ready to set our trap. We play pawn to h4. Similar idea to h5 in that variation when you win the queen. Now, there are a couple of options here. They're both bad. The best move should be f6. And if f6 is the best move, then it's obvious that white is better. You continue d4, they go bishop f7, you go bishop to d3, for example. This is not a good structure. For a Caro-Kann player who would like to play e6, this is not a good structure. So most Caro-Kann players, even if they do find f6, are going to be in trouble from here on. If they go h5, again, white should be better. This is not losing by force, but after knight e5 and bishop h7, you can take on h5. Or after knight e5 and queen d6, you can play d4. And after, for example, knight d7, you can take on g6. And queen takes g6 and something like bishop e2, and this pawn is going to fall. So at least you win a pawn. So after h4, they either play h5 and lose the h5 pawn, they play f6 and have a bad position, or they lose straight away with the move that seems most logical. Now, I'm sure 95% of people online would play h6 here, and this loses by force. Now, this was played, okay, excuse me, the next move actually loses by force. From here on, white is almost winning regardless of what happens. You continue knight e5. And the way to stay in the game, sort of stay in the game, is queen to d6. But now knight g6, queen g6 and d4, and on Grandmaster and Master level should be winning. The engine says almost +2, so on our level it's not completely game over, but after bishop c4 you can see that white's position is perfect. This queen is completely misplaced, and there could be some trouble on f7 later on. But most people are going to play bishop h7, and again, this was played 18 times in master games, master tournament games, and it's all over now. This one is a bit harder, so you can pause the video and try to figure it out for yourself. Okay, the idea is pressure on f7, so you continue queen h5, threatening checkmate. As you can see, there really is no easy way to cover that, because if you go queen d5, I have bishop c4. So that simply doesn't work. So g6 is forced. And now you continue putting pressure on f7, queen f3. This is all forced and easy. They only have one sensible way to defend. f6 and f5 really are not good moves. You should be completely positionally losing after that. So I think most people would play knight f6, simply covering. And now queen b3 again. Pressure on f7, but now you have a second threat. And now this is where it gets interesting. They go queen d5. And this is why, if you don't know the trap, you probably wouldn't get a winning position. Your knight is hanging with check, which is scary. But you take on b7, and after queen e5 check, you go bishop e2. The rook is hanging, they go e6, trying to develop. And now if you take the rook immediately, it's very hard to get your queen out. If you play queen a8, they have queen c7. So there are a couple of ideas here. One idea could be to give your rook this idea of a rook lift. This could be one idea. The other idea, well, I'm going to show you the move. So the correct move is a4. Queen a8 should be better for white, but it's hard to get your queen out. They go bishop c5, covering everything. And if they go, for example, bishop to g7, you can go rook a3. And after, I don't know, knight d5, you now take on a8. And if they go queen c7, you can go a5. And the idea is a6 and queen b7. So after a4, when it becomes clear what white wants to do, let's imagine bishop c5 happens. You take on a8, they go queen c7, and you can now play... This is an engine line, but again, has happened 18 times, and people who have had this prepared did play the correct way. It's very hard to find this. You again could go for this, and it should be okay. But the best way to play is d4. Bishop takes d4 is forced, pretty much, because if not, if here, then you just win, because if here, then takes, well, it's actually not that clear because it's always check. Okay, I'm not so sure about this. I'm sorry, I just assumed that bishop takes a5 loses to rook takes because the knight is hanging. Let's check this with the engine. It's +6. a5 does work, it's still +6. If takes, then you simply go c3 and the bishop goes back. And you can take here. Okay. It's still +5. You're up a lot of material. But after d4, most people should take on d4. And now you go c3. And the best move is actually to castle. Because if bishop e5, you go bishop e3. So that's the second idea. So from this position, let's go back. So you put pressure on the pawn, they go knight f6, you put pressure on the pawn, they play queen d5, you take on b7, they take your knight, you cover. From this position, after they play e6, there are two ideas. One idea is to put pressure on the a7 pawn with the bishop, therefore your queen isn't trapped. The second idea is to play a4, a5, a6, therefore you have queen b7. So that's something you have to remember in this trap. Again, let's look at it from the beginning. So the exchange in the two knights, d4, knight e4, bishop f5, you go knight g3, they go bishop g6, you go h4. h5 loses the h5 pawn, f6 gives black a bad structure, h6 loses the game. Pressure on f7, pressure on f7 and b7, takes on b7, and now a4. Okay, so the idea is again twofold, and this, I know this is hard, it's hard for me as well. Either a5, a6, or c3, d4, or d4, c3, and bishop to e3. All right, the next trap is easy, and I think this is a very fun one, and I'm hoping I will get somebody into this. Although I don't play e4 that often anymore, and I don't play the two knights almost ever, but I think it's worth playing the two knights simply because of this. So c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, bishop g4 main line, h3 main line. If they go bishop h5, which is a move I've played in one tournament game and I won it, you could go for the main line with ed and so on, trying to get black to play f6. If you don't know it, you should know it. But there's a very tricky move here, and that move is bishop to e2. Now this may seem strange, and it may seem like it doesn't punish black's bishop h5, which is true, but I challenge you to find a move for black. It's very hard to find a sensible move here. You could play e6, but then I could simply take and play d4 and have a slight advantage. So you would like to develop this knight, and I think the mistake I'm about to show you could happen. You cannot play knight d7 because I simply win a pawn. So some people are going to play knight a6, and this has actually happened in tournament games, and this wins on the spot. This one is easy, so you just win a pawn. If black doesn't know what he is doing, you actually win the queen. So you take ed5, and black cannot take back. Black has to play, I don't even know what. Probably bishop f3 is the best move, where you have to take with the g pawn because of what I'm about to show you. If they take the pawn back, it's game over. You just win the queen. So probably after ed5, bishop f3, gf3, and I don't know, knight f6. But yeah, this is bishop e2 is a nasty trap, because if black plays knight a6, which is the only square to develop the knight to, it's over. Okay, now the next trap, I don't know if I can call it a trap. It's a tricky variation. Yeah, it's a trap. It's a trap. I fell for it a week ago in a training game you can find on the channel. It's called a very poisoned pawn. So c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, two knights. I played bishop g4. I had the black pieces here. My opponent played d4, which is a move that's theoretical but not common, and I wasn't prepared for it. So in this position, if you watch the game, you can see me analyzing, well, why shouldn't I just win a pawn here? And I can win a pawn. I did win a pawn, and I got destroyed. Here is how. d4, knight e4, bishop f3. If they play gf3, black's position is strategically much better. So queen f3, and I took the pawn. Now, this should be about +3 for white, so maybe not over in 5 moves, but if black doesn't know what he is doing, it's going to be over in 5 moves. And my opponent actually didn't play perfectly here. He played, I think, bishop d3. The way to almost win immediately is bishop e3. And now there are 2 moves. You can play queen b4, you can play queen b2. You can also retreat back to d8, but they're all bad. The 2 best moves, queen b2 and queen b4, lose anyway. If you play queen b2, then the winning idea is remarkable. You play bishop c4. And if black doesn't know this position, it's just crushing. There's a threat on f7, which isn't easy to defend. I don't know what to suggest. If black plays something like e6, you're going to castle and you have 1,000 pieces out. Let's look at what happens if black decides to win all the pieces. So queen a1 check, king e2, queen h1, then queen f7 check, king d8, and queen f8 check, and obviously it's collapsing, it's game over. And if after bishop e3 they go queen b4 check, you go bishop d2, and now if, for example, queen b6, then you go bishop c4, and the same idea. If e6, now this is completely crushing, bishop e6, f e6, queen h5 check, let's say king e7, I don't know, it's hard to find the move, bishop g5 check, knight f6, and castles queenside. You're a piece down, but you're completely winning. He's playing without 2 rooks and the bishop. And if after bishop d2 they go queen b2, again same idea, bishop c4. It's just your bishop is on d2, not on e3. Again, if takes, we have the same pattern. If knight f6, you can castle kingside, and this is +5. Okay, the next trap, I have been on the receiving end of it twice, all in online games, and the first time it happened I was surprised. The second time it happened I was really annoyed, and it's never going to happen again because I studied this position in depth. And this could happen very often because all of black's moves falling into the trap are seemingly the most sensible moves. Okay, c6, knight f3, d5, e d5, c d5. This is a weird exchange. I don't even know how to call this. So d4, knight c6, c3, bishop g4. This has to be the best move, and it is the best move. And white goes bishop b5. And now, one thing you should be aware of in the Caro-Kann is that once you play e6 and this bishop has been moved outside of the pawn chain, you could have some issues here. I played e6 both of those times, and my opponent played queen a4. And this position is fine for black. Black should be slightly better. But my next move lost the game, and I did it twice. I think in about 2 years, or something like that, so it wasn't close together, but still I did the same mistake twice. And I actually remembered it once he played queen a4, but I couldn't remember how I blundered the first time. The best move here is incredibly hard to find. I think my mistake is something black will do all the time. I played knight e7, and now a very simple winning idea for white is knight e5. The engine says plus 0.5, plus 0.6, but from a practical perspective, this is very hard. I played bishop f5, and of course this loses a pawn, so knight c6, knight c6, bishop c6, bc6, queen c6, king e7 forced. And if you don't win this position for white, then I mean you probably either had some bad luck or you blundered. You're a pawn up, black's pawn structure is ruined, black's bishop is blocked in, there is no compensation. The engine gives some compensation. I don't even know how this can be less than +1, but in any case I lost the game. Now the best move after queen a4, since bishop g4 is correct and e6 is correct, if you know it, then good. If you find it, I don't believe you found it, the best move is f6, which is very strange, giving up a pawn. Bishop c6, bc6, queen c6, king f7, and black is -1. black is much better here. If, for example, knight bd2, you continue bishop d6, and all of your pieces are flying in, with the rook coming either here or here, and black should be better. So this queen a4 idea isn't good if black knows f6 and if black can play that pawn down position perfectly, but I don't think I could. Even if I knew f6, unless I was extremely well prepared, I wouldn't play this well. So yeah, this is a nice trap to set up, especially because the variation doesn't even have a name. So after c6, knight f3, d5, and now not knight c3, but ed, an exchange with the knight on f3, which makes it very tempting for Caro-Kann players to play bishop g4. I mean, most people would play bishop g4. You could consider bishop f5, which is better because knight e5 isn't with tempo, but bishop g4 makes a lot more sense to me. And now bishop b5, e6, again the most natural move, and queen a4. Okay, the final trap I want to show you is the trap that happens in the Breyer. Now, this variation is weird for white, and it's not the best way to play, but it's not losing or anything. Black should have a slight advantage, and you could win in 7 moves. So c6, d3, d5. Now, you all know, as you saw in the Korchnoi trap, that knight d2 is the move here. But knight c3 is the beginning of our variation. Knight c3 is a strange move. It's not a bad move. It's just that the game should be about equal. Black should continue e5, which is normal in the Breyer. And now the best move for white, which should keep equality, is f4. But we're not playing f4. We're playing knight f3. Okay, now the setup may seem strange, and it is strange. Black continues knight f6, which is the most normal developing move. Taking here doesn't really work for some of you well-known reasons, but I don't want to go into that right now. What we are going to do here is ed and cd, and then we're going to take. Okay, after knight e5, white should be worse, and with the insertion of these moves, slightly less worse than if he took straight away, and the punishment should be d4. Now most players with black are going to play d4, and you set up a trap with queen e2 here. Now after queen e2, black is very close to winning if they know what they are doing. They are going to be a pawn down, but they are going to have an overwhelming advantage. Now the trap we are looking at is takes the knight. If black takes the knight, you win immediately with knight c6 check, you win the queen. So it's a fairly simple trap. But since it's a bad variation, I think it's highly likely that black is going to fall for it, especially if they know the normal Breyer plans. I didn't fall for it because I never saw it on the board, but I don't know whether I would play this correctly with black. After queen e2, setting up this trap, the correct move is bishop to e7, and after bishop to e7, black is much better. You have to play knight e4, and they go knight e4. You go queen e4, for example. It's better for black. Or after knight e4, they could go queen a5 check. You don't have c3, so the knight is attacked. So you have to play knight d2. This is even better than knight takes e4 for black. Now simply castles, and this is -1 for black. White is a pawn up because black has very natural development, very good bishop pair. This knight is stranded, seems weird. So again, if you want to mix it up, play knight c3 in the Breyer. Nobody is going to know that. e5 and then knight f3, knight f6, then you take, play knight e5, and if they go d4, which is absolutely correct, you set up the trap with queen e2. Now, most people are not going to know bishop e7. And even if they know it, you're going to have a worse position, a pawn up, so not too bad. Okay, I hope you liked the traps I prepared. Let me know what you think. Let me know if I've missed any. Now, I had 20 or something, or 20 or more on my list, but they were highly unlikely to happen, and they were weird. Some of them were engine lines, some of them were too specific. So I chose the traps which I thought could happen in practical games, which did happen in practical games. So let me know what you think. if you want to share some more traps with me, I'm going to be continuing this series with traps in other openings. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.